Hello. Thank you all for giving your time and lending your voice to this evening's discussion. We have had tumultuous, I guess. We're coming off of one of a heck of a week with the winter freeze. And I know with this Monday, it's been crazy busy for us all. As I was sharing earlier, everything that was canceled last week was moved to Monday. So thank you, given the extremely busy day that you've had. Thank you for joining us. We will be actively using the chat this evening, so please place your questions and comments there. And as you all know, education is something that's near and dear to my heart, as well as those panelists that I have here with us today. And we know that education transforms lives. It makes this world a better place. It creates the path that breaks barriers. It helps us to advance the social well-being of others, provides access, and improves upon systems. So welcome to the Breaking Barriers, Fulfilling the Dream discussion. Our panel this evening of current and past barrier breakers have achieved historical feats that represent glass ceilings being broken in various sectors of the legal field. We are a nation of laws and they are settled in the court of law. So please join me in the chat in welcoming our guest panelists with comments in the chat. I'll start with Algenita Scott Davis. She has had a very storied career grounded in justice as a practicing lawyer in the private sector and public sector, a community leader that has received appointments from 6 mayors, you heard me correctly, conveyor of knowledge as a professor of law, public affairs, business, and an advocate in the nonprofit sector, creating affordable housing and business opportunities. Ms. Davis earned her JD from Howard University Law School, and after beginning her law career in the corporate sector, would go on to serve as the first African-American named general counsel for the Port of Houston Authority. So welcome, Algenita. We're so glad to have you here with us.
Thank you.
Brian Middleton has had an impressive journey in both the private and public sector, has prepared him to currently serve as the Fort Bend County District Attorney. Brian began his career as a briefing attorney at the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, served as Assistant District Attorney at the Fort Bend County District Attorney's Office, as an associate attorney in the private sector, practicing lawyer at his own firm, municipal prosecutor, judge, and adjunct professor. He was elected as Fort Bend County District Attorney in November 2018, becoming the first African-American to serve in that position. Welcome, Brian.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So glad you were able to join us. Next, we have Bridgette Smith-Lawson, who's serving our community through law and is the county attorney for Fort Bend County. She has served as managing attorney for the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services for up to 23 counties. Bridgette has worked in private practice across many sectors and was elected in November 2020 as the first African-American to serve as Fort Bend County Attorney. Welcome, Bridgette.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
My pleasure. Christian Menefee is committed to law and service, having worked in private practice where he provided countless hours of pro bono work to organizations. Following his election in November 2020, Christian became the first African-American to be elected Harris County Attorney, the chief civil lawyer of the largest county in Texas. Welcome, Christian.
Thank you. Super excited to be here.
I'm so glad to have you all. Thank you so much for being here as a barrier breaker this evening and sharing in this discussion. You've got so much wisdom and so much to share with us. And as I'm reading just very snippets of your bios, it really just shows how we're so well prepared for the roles we're in, and no one can question how you got there and why you're there, because you've done everything to be there, far more than what's required by many others. So just so humbled and glad to be here with you all this evening. So as you all know, as African Americans, we know a thing or two about being hidden figures within, throughout history and in present day. But Brian, Algenita, Bridgette, Christian, you are not hidden figures. Each of you have broken barriers as African Americans, and you represent more of the diversity that we would like to see in the legal profession. So I really want to jump in with our questions here. So I would like to have you guys just take each of you, spend a few minutes talking to us about what inspired your journey to becoming a barrier breaker, and if we can start with Algenita.
Sure. First of all, thanks for allowing me to participate and for remembering a barrier that was broken over 40 years ago, believe it or not. That's it's a long time, and you don't think of it as a long time when you're living it. But yes, it was 1979 when that happened. And the reason that I wanted to point that out about the timeline was because I think it's important to know what African Americans do when they work together. My being named the General Counsel for the Port of Houston Authority was not something that you could run for, elected for, but there was a port commissioner who was very, very active in what was then called the Houston Citizens Chamber of Commerce. That's now the Great Houston Black Chamber. And the Great Houston Black Chamber made sure that it sought opportunities for African Americans in governmental positions all over. And so the port commissioner, who was a gentleman named Howard Middleton, asked for one of the positions as the port revamped itself. And they said, okay, well, we'll give you the lawyer's position. So what he did was he came to the Houston Lawyers Association meeting, walked into the meeting and said, look, this is, why I'm here. I feel it's really important that we have an African American in a management position at the Port Authority. That had never happened in its 60-something year history. So we want to have somebody in that position. It just as a manager, as one of the directors, and that director just happened to be the general counsel. So I raised my hand. Okay. That's how I became the general counsel for the Port of Houston Authority. It's simple as that. Recognition of an organization like the Houston Lawyers, recognition that that organization could make a recommendation for somebody, of course, with the background, and then making sure that an organization that was the African American Chamber ensured that there was African American representation on what was then the port that generated 1 out of 3 jobs in Harris County, because the oil companies, of course, are located on the port. So that's how I got there. But I think it's important to recognize the role of African American organizations and what happens when people work together.
Okay, very well. Thank you, Algenita. Brian, please tell us what has inspired your journey.
Wow. Honestly, people like Algenita Scott Davis. Of course, I grew up in Riverside Terrace, and she mentioned my Uncle Howard. I had role models, my father, who's also a lawyer, but really probably the greatest influence was my father. He was still is a fighter. Some people say the man would fight a fence post, but it was what I saw in him, and standing up was what was for, what is right and protecting people. And so I picked up that same spirit of being a protector and being a fighter. So I went to law school to protect people. I ran for district attorney so I could protect people. And I serve now by protecting people. So that's what has driven me, is my desire to be a protector and a fighter. So, and I'm fortunate because of the people before me who made the sacrifices, who opened the doors, and allowed this to be possible, including Miss Algenita Scott Davis, who's a legend in her own right.
Fantastic. Bridgette, what inspired your journey as a barrier breaker?
Well, I can tell you when I first sought out this position and considered running, I wasn't thinking about breaking a barrier. Really, I was just thinking that this position is becoming available and my skill set is congruent and I know how to do this job and I'm running. My background is a little different. I grew up in a very challenging environment. I've seen a lot of things growing up through poverty, single parent home, and having to work through college and having many struggles and many barriers that probably would say that I shouldn't be here today. But I am a fighter. One of the things that drew me to the state was adult protective services. And having been raised by my grandmother with a 6th grade education and seeing her struggle with caring for my aging aunt who suffered with Alzheimer's dementia, I was very sensitive to the caring needs of aging adults. And I had experience in my private practice with working with different elements of, probate law, guardianship. So I applied for that job, worked through that system for several years. And then I went to child welfare, just attracted to the issues of, broken families and fixing and repairing and meeting the needs of people from a legal aspect and from a legal angle. Went for the managing attorney position. And in that position, as you read in my bio, I managed lawyers across a wide expanse of Southeast Texas and having to deal with county attorneys and district attorneys every day, and also navigating one of the most challenging, misunderstood, and very impactful agency, Child Protective Services, in terms that it's dealing with families every day. I knew that everything that I learned from working in that capacity, there was nothing that the county attorney position could throw to me that I could not, wouldn't be prepared for. So I was told that the incumbent was retiring, and I had to ask myself a couple of questions, and really, why not me was one of the main things. Why shouldn't I run? And I stepped out on faith and I ran hard. And throughout the process, yes, I understood and was made aware, rather, that there was never a Black female county attorney elected in the state of Texas, let alone Fort Bend County, and that fired me up even more. So here I am today.
Woohoo! All right. Thank you. Christian, please tell us what inspired your journey to becoming a barrier breaker.
I feel like I'm the first person to have to speak after County Attorney Smith-Lawson, who knows that he's not going to be able to live up to what she just said. So I ran for this position because I saw an office that wasn't being used to help the communities that I come from, the folks who I had been representing, the folks who I've been advocating for, and I decided to step up and do something about it. Similar to District Attorney Middleton, I view this office as a sword and a shield for the people of Harris County, and that includes all people, including the marginalized, low income, and minorities who are typically forgotten when certain folks are in power. So for me, it was never a decision about trying to break a barrier or being the first. In fact, I had no clue that I would be the youngest and first Harris County attorney until about a month before the election. But prior to that, it was about just fighting for what I believed in. I come from a working class family, 2 military parents. I always tell folks I didn't meet my first lawyer until I was in college. I probably didn't know what a shareholder was until I got to college. So every step of my life has been stepping into rooms, into avenues, into classes where there had never been someone before me who I knew, who looked like me, who was able to give me the advice. So I just viewed this as an opportunity to step into a position to advocate for people across the county, into an office that, and we can talk about this a little bit later, but an office that largely doesn't really have a statutory confine, right? There's a charge, it's the chief civil legal office for Harris County, but we're not known for particularly doing anything. So that leaves a lot of discretion to the individual who's running it. So I'm able to now direct the resources of the office to the things that I'm passionate about, including fighting for and advocating for people. So it's a situation that ended up working out, and about a month before Election Day, I learned that if I was successful, I would have broken a barrier. But I think the most important thing to take away from it is, there are kids out there at public schools here in Houston who may have never met a lawyer, may have never seen a young African-American man or woman in whatever position it may be, And my number one goal through being a barrier breaker is to express to them, you were qualified enough, you were competent enough, and regardless of what room you're in, you deserve to be there. And the moment that you really lean in and show everybody your talent, you're gonna blow minds.
I love it. You know, there's a common thread here. It's selflessness. It's willing to be a fighter, willing to put yourself forward for others, being caring, thoughtful, just not saying you wanted to be a barrier breaker. You didn't, you know, set out in life, say, I'm going to kick down those glass ceilings, but you just did the work because it was what was required. And I love it because that's what makes you great leaders. And that is what has propelled you, some of what has propelled you to where you are today. And so with that, Brian, I want to pivot over to you. You know, in this time, there's been such heightened focus on the challenges underrepresented groups face, particularly Black and Brown people. The criminal courts are largely filled with Black and Brown people, many whose fate is determined by people who don't look like them or deal with their issues in a humane manner. What would you describe the current state of our criminal justice system as?
Wow, you know, it's in one word, it's evolving. Where it was 10 years ago is really far away from where it is now. We still have work to do, but I have seen it transform, and I see more fairness in the system now. And that was because of hard work by people like Rodney Ellis, who were fighting for criminal justice reform when it was not popular. And so when I go to these national conferences and they talk about reforms that they're working on, I'm like, hell, we're already doing that in Texas. You know, we're on to the next thing. And so that's when I realized that Texas, you know, we really are fortunate here. And so, and that's not to say that there's not work to be done, but that does say that we're ahead of the curve. The work that needs to be done now is making sure that humanity is respected. And you really can't legislate that. You can try to train it, but you just have to go through a system of public awareness and disclosure and accountability to make sure people who don't want to do the right thing are weeded out of the system. So there has to be a lot of transparency and there has to be a lot of accountability. And so that's why my office has a public integrity division that's very, very active, and a civil rights division, which is also active. But they're out there, they're watchdogs in the community, and then they're holding people accountable. So, you know, when people cross the line, they violate other people's rights, they have 2 departments in Fort Bend County they're gonna have to deal with, including Bridgette, you know, so.
Brian, are those departments that were there before you ascended to this position?
No, ma'am. I created them. I came in knowing what was needed and got to work.
I love it. That's called leadership. And so the word here, Bridgette, is evolving, right? So as such, opening doors for minorities, particularly women of color in court systems, provides insight and strategies on how to improve diversity in workplace culture. What needs to be done to level the playing field for minorities to receive promotions and to ascend to leadership in legal professions? Because, you know, I've started out these introductions with the first. So in 2021, you know, when are we going to be able to stop saying the first across so many spaces, particularly in the legal sector?
Okay, well, yeah, I don't want to hear the first too much longer, and we certainly don't want to be the onlys. And a lot of times there's a blessing and a burden with that. But I do believe as part of our being the first, it's part of our duty and responsibility to actively look for women of color, men of color, people of color, to give them an opportunity. When I was at the state, I had one of the most diverse litigation groups in the state of Texas. I hired 3rd grade graduates. I look for internships for 3rd grade graduates, and that's where I went to law school. And I plan to do the same thing here. I actually just hired one of my lawyers from the state who worked with me a few years ago. giving her an opportunity. So I say all of that to say we have to be intentional to create opportunities for people of color to get, not even if their not skill set is not up to par to what you need for your office in terms of hiring, creating those internship opportunities so that they can get some sort of exposure and get some sort of an opportunity to see what the practice is like, to learn it, to work it, and then be able to build their skill set to hopefully be a candidate to be selected for a hiring position. So I definitely see that as a responsibility, a duty for me to give back, to reach back, to pull up, and not even just for law students, even investing your time outside of the practice. Today, DA Brian Middleton did an awesome job of announcing a youth program that's specifically targeted to children, well, youth rather who are facing, I'll say, a turning point or a crossroad in life where they can make some bad decisions and go down a terrible route, or make some good decisions, exposing them even at a young age outside of college and high school, but just exposing them to things that let them see themselves outside of the environment that they're in. So if you look at it from that perspective, not just in your hiring and what you do in your office, but what you do in the community to reach children and youth of color, to show them that, hey, there are first and there could be others, and reaching back and investing in them at a young age. And then as they matriculate through high school and college and law school, and constantly being able to reach back. So yeah, we're the first, but we don't want to be the onlys. And we have to be intentional to not be the onlys. Reagan, we can't hear you.
Sorry, thank you. So reaching back, pulling others along with you, bringing them with you is so important. And it's important, so we have to have the confidence, right, to do that. We've got to be willing to bring others along that look like us. And not be afraid to do that. You know, we shouldn't be in the room counting the number of heads and saying, well, maybe there are too many because there's now 2 of us, but there's 35 of them. So with that, Christian, what do you think it would take for us to see systemic shifts take hold that have a long-lasting impact?
You know, when I was in the private sector, this is something that we would deal with there as well. Just about every single law firm that I worked at, there was always a problem with hiring and retaining diverse talent. At one point at a law firm I was working at that had about 3,000 lawyers internationally, I was the only Black male who was in an associate position at the entire firm. So it's an issue that is across the legal spectrum. And I think the recommendations that folks would make out in the private sector were the exact same for the public sector. And the most important one is you have to be intentional about finding diverse talent. You know, we're kicking up the redistricting process here in Harris County, and at the Harris County Attorney's Office on behalf of the county, we've engaged 3 firms to represent the county in that process. One of the firms that we've hired, per my recommendation, was a firm that's owned by a Black woman who lives in Harris County. And it's not that she's not qualified. It's not that she doesn't belong in this space. It's that under traditional principles, she probably wouldn't get the reps just because folks would not be looking in her direction. So when you're hiring people, when you're engaging folks for county or city contracts or business, you have to be intentional about finding diverse talent. It's not enough to just put out a process that has bids out there, and you're not at all trying to build a team that is reflective of the great diversity that is in Fort Bend County, that is in Harris County. Yeah, in Harris County, we've also, and this is an effort that's been led by Commissioner Ellis, we're in the process of creating an MWBE program, which again is incredibly important to ensure that the folks who are representing the county in various measures look like the county that they represent. My leadership team is incredibly diverse. It is filled with Black and Latino, Black women and Latinas. I have 2 South Asian men. It is a team that looks like Harris County. So the sooner that folks in leadership positions begin to be intentional about finding talent that looks like the communities that surround them, the better we'll all be. And frankly, it matters while at work. One of the things we did recently was object to a permit at a facility was trying to get out on the east side of town to emit a very toxic chemical in a neighborhood called Manchester. Well, that neighborhood is predominantly Latino, right? Well, if you don't have folks in leadership working on these matters who look like the people in that community, there's a huge information gap. You're not able to get access to information from folks in the community about how they feel about these issues. You're not able to adequately communicate the work that you're doing back to them. So it's not just window dressing, it actually matters, and it's something that every single leader in public office should be focused on and should be intentional about.
Well said, Christian. So Algenita, I want you to give an expanded lens on this. With your, you start out, you're a lawyer at heart. That's the foundation of who you are. But you have had such a career that has taken you through so many expansive opportunities. So as all of us know, there are numerous economic factors that impact our quality of life. One being housing. These are problems that have been long experienced by Black people, a subset of America that face a perpetual challenge with achieving economic progress through home ownership and wealth creation. Given all that you have seen, all that you have witnessed, what are you most hopeful about? And has the needle moved enough?
Well, I am definitely hopeful about, and seeing the changes that have come about. You're looking at somebody who was a founder of the Black Women Lawyers Association when there were 20 Black women lawyers in Houston. So, when the fact that there are 1,000, 1,500 or 2,000 in the Houston area, and the fact that I don't even know them, and the fact that they were born well after, I became a lawyer, that makes me very, very hopeful. When I see lawyers, Black lawyers, Hispanic lawyers doing so many things, I'm excited about it because I have lived that life in Houston where there were 3 firms, the largest 3, that hired 1 lawyer, Black lawyer per year. That was the affirmative action process. There were 2 corporations that hired 1 Black lawyer per year. That was the affirmative action process. And it wasn't called affirmative action. It was just called, well, we're going to get 1. Okay. So when I see that whole evolution that has occurred, when I think of firms that, but for that assertive, I want to talk about this thing about being assertive. That's the word. Whenever you're in a position, you got to be assertive about making sure that not only you're not the first or the second or the last, but you got to make sure you've done something that creates opportunities for others and wealth for others. And sometimes, frankly, you got to be sneaky to do it. One of the things that I got a chance to do at the Port Authority was when the chairman of the port walked into my office and said, from now on, all of our legal work is going to go to Benson and Elkins. I said, oh, okay, sir, thank you very much. Well, what he didn't know was that I was going to find the 1 Black lawyer that they had hired that time and send all of the port's work to Benson and Elkins. And that's how you create a partner at Benson and Elkins. And that's the kind of thing that you have to do when you are in these positions. You got to identify the opportunities, sometimes using discretion to do so, and be assertive, consistently assertive, no matter what they say to you, no matter how where did this person come from? Be assertive about what you're doing when it comes to creating opportunities for lawyers that wouldn't see that time. My law clerks, Black, white, Hispanic, came from Texas Southern University School of Law before it was Thurgood Marshall. So, I mean, this is the thing that's important, that you have to be assertive when you're in these positions, and you got to figure out how to work to do that. I had to say that point because I'm listening to these programs and the things that you guys are doing, Brian, Bridgette, and Christian, that are different. And you are able to do them because you have the support. And you've taken advantage of the fact that you happen to have that support right now to get it done. And so I'm really pleased to, I'm just really excited about that. So that's what I'm excited about. Now, economic opportunities, that's your responsibility as a human being. You must make sure that you're creating economic opportunities and creating economic equity in whatever you do, whether it's in the legal profession or whatever profession that you are working in. Housing just happens to be my passion. So my focus is affordable housing. So I'm just gonna die running around trying to create affordable housing wherever I can. But I really think that the password on this whole business of moving forward is that wherever you are, you got to be assertive about doing what you're doing, and you got to be creative. Sneaky is an inappropriate word. I take that back. You got to be creative about how you're doing it.
I love it. Assertive and creative. It's your responsibility. I love it. And we've got to, you also said something, there's the support right now and taking advantage of the time. We have to always realize the timing isn't going to always be there. But if this is the perfect time in the season, we can't sit on it. We've got to take action. We have to act. And so I applaud all of what you all are doing and have shared so far. And so now, as we move forward in this conversation, Brian, through our lived experiences as Black people, we know that there is unequal treatment under the law. And this unspoken truth of America's racial divide has been televised to the world. In our lifetime, many Americans would like to see our country emerge beyond this divide with enforcement of the law. Brian, what are ways through which our country could emerge beyond the intransigent persistence of inequality and injustice with our justice system?
Wow. Want me to answer that tonight, or is this like a two-part series?
I'm glad you got the big words, Brian.
Just give us the cliff notes,
Yeah, fundamentally what it boils down to is humanity and treating and respecting humanity, and how you get people to get there is complicated. Like I said earlier, you can't legislate humanity, but you can put things in place to put people in check. And so we've started to turn the corner. Right after the George Floyd incident, I was just amazed at all the progress and change and enlightenment that I saw. And I'm calling it the greatest awakening in world history. But, during that time, we were trying to help people cope and grieve. And so we were going around and we were going to the different rallies and protests. And every time I went to one, it was a young person who came up to me in tears, asking me for help and helping, asking for understanding. And that's when I knew that we were turning the corner in America. And, I looked up, and I know a lot of people on here probably driven through Vida, Texas. Every time I drove through Vida, I made sure my doors were locked and I had plenty of gas in the tank. And to look up and see that they were having a George Floyd rally in Vida, Texas.
Yeah.
I went out to Fulshire, which was a place that, man, I hated campaigning out there. They let us know they didn't want us over there. And so I went out there and gave a speech, and I looked out in the audience and I saw white-haired white women with Black Lives Matter t-shirts on them. And so I think what's happened with this pandemic is that it's put us into our feelings and we're into our individuality. And so, I don't want to preach, but, I think that God had his hand in this, because we had to get to this point to where our minds and our hearts were open to see what is real, what we've been knowing. I was looking at the George Floyd tape, and it was just symbolic of what it's like to be Black, to have a foot on your neck, to be crying out for help, and have people standing there who had the ability to save you, to help you, and they did nothing. It was just a metaphor for being Black. And to have that played out on TV and hear the sounds of it, hear the sound of suffering, it really moved us ahead as a country, as the world. And so I think that if we continue to use this moment, I call it a watershed moment, just like Rosa Parks, if we continue to use this momentum while people are open to it, I think we have an opportunity to have some really meaningful change. That's what Dr. King was working on. He was working on people's hearts, and he was using love to transform people. And so we have another opportunity just like that to change the world. And because I look in my code book and nothing that we see on TV is legal. And I see Dean Douglas on here, and I'm sure he'll second that, but there's nothing legal about killing a Black man who's unarmed. So it's never been a question of law, it's been a question of morality and what's in people's hearts. So we can change all the laws we want to, but until people respect humanity, then we're going to continue to have the problem. I mean, it's in our culture. We get up and we pledge allegiance. They want us to do it at all the sporting events. One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And as a Black person, you always cringe when you feel that because you're like, man, I wish it was so. But it's up to America to live up to its creed and stop being hypocrites and to really embrace what they are. And, I tell people it's time to look in the mirror and ask yourself, am I who I purport to be? Are my words and my actions in agreement? And I think when we all do that, Black, brown, white, green, whatever, then we'll see and we'll start to grow and we'll start to change the corner. Because it took a pandemic, it took a power outage, it took all these things to get our attention for us to get down to humanity. It has really taught us what's important in life. And it took all of this to get us here. So, I don't think it's something that we can really do as leaders, but as being in this world, being in this universe, I think there's something greater going on that's making this and helping it be a catalyst. And we just got to stay committed to this process and keep forging on and fighting for justice.
Brian, thank you. Humanity is something you continue to bring up. Something that when I'm onboarding a colleague, with my work, something that always comes up in training is thoughtfulness. I can't teach you to be that. You got to want to be thoughtful. And it's so important in the work we do for children, in STEM education, for everybody that we do. I really need you to be thoughtful in every decision that you make. So I appreciate that, bringing it back to humanity. At the end of the day, that's what it is, right? And we got to hope that there's something greater that's really helping to move that needle where it needs to be. And so to add on this, I would like for everyone on the panel to speak to this. So I don't want to be having these same conversations 50 years from now, that we were having 50 years ago. And we're having, a lot of the same conversations. We can look at, it's Black History Month. So there's so many great movies, historical movies on about the plight of Black people. And I'm like, wow, if you just put that right here today, it's still relevant. It is still happening. So I will begin with you, Christian, and I would like everyone on the panel to speak to this. How do we make lasting impact toward fulfilling the dream so that we're not having these same conversations? Yes, I know it's humanity, but what can we do about correcting the age-old issues 20 years from now?
I think we have to, one, have the tough conversations, and two, make the tough decisions. The events of the past couple of weeks have been something that every single person in Texas experienced while we're still trying to climb out of a pandemic. We had a massive winter storm and power disaster that left millions of folks across the state of Texas without power, without water, freezing, trying to keep their families safe. I can almost guarantee you that if this disaster would have only happened in low income or Black and brown neighborhoods, it wouldn't have been a thing. And that's in large part because we know that more often than not, our lives are valued less than the majority. So it's up to us to make everything that is a thing to our people, that is a thing to marginalized people, a thing to everyone. to have the tough conversations, to file the tough lawsuits, to file the tough charges that may be unpopular at the time when looking through the lens of the majority, but ultimately are going to be working to advocate for, to protect marginalized communities. I know that everybody has a different space that they're in. Legislators do their thing, the executive does their thing. But from my perspective, in a civil legal position, the way that I aid in that process is by filing the lawsuits that are tough lawsuits to file, but are necessary in order to bring attention to a certain issue and to protect a certain marginalized community. By, when appropriate, going against big business to benefit a community that is typically forgotten. I think that's how my office impacts it, but I expect that everybody's going to have a different answer. But what you'll find in the similarity, I think, is ensuring that we're fighting for people, even when it's not politically expedient, even when it's not popular.
Bridgette.
Of course, I agree with Christian said, in terms of being in similar civil roles, just in different counties, we do have to set a tone with our leadership and a tone with our engagement and with our platforms for our offices to make sure that we basically fight and protect the unprotected. We need to make those old attitudes and those old ideas and just call it what it is, those concepts of hate. We have to make those things a thing of the past. No, we can't legislate morality. We can't teach people we could teach people core values, but we can't make them their core values. But what we can do in our leadership roles is make our environments such that those attitudes, they won't stand, that they are the minority, that when you come here in my office and you don't have an attitude of acceptance and inclusion, then you're not welcome. So in our sphere of authorities, we basically have to, and that's for everyone on the Zoom, every arena that you have and every social network you have to make sure that hate is not accepted in your realm. You won't be associated with it. You won't be basically, keep it going or extend those same hateful attitudes in whatever position of power or of authority that you have, that you use your influence to stamp out those attitudes of hate, of bigotry, so that we can keep moving forward. I don't know how far we will go with this. I hope the momentum keeps going. We've had different things happen in the past and people say that, oh, this is temporary, it'll die down. But I do agree with Brian that this is a watershed moment and we need to keep striking while the iron is hot. We cannot let this feeling die. We cannot let the momentum die. A couple of months ago, I had the pleasure of speaking at the Discovery Green Center. It was me and I think about 6 or 7 other ladies who put together the Breonna Taylor protest. And hundreds of people showed up with just a few folk using their efforts. I rolled a karaoke machine from my house to use at Discovery Green. And just our few voices speaking out to hundreds. The news media showed up. We had rappers who show up, Trade the Truth and a couple of others. All you have to do is use your energy and your resources. You are already equipped with whatever you need to do what is needed. So just within our own sphere of authorities, you don't have to be elected to be powerful. You can be powerful in the classroom, but whatever your sphere of authority, whatever God has given you, the influence and the power over, use that to fight against these old attitudes of hatred and bigotry and make them uncomfortable and make us the majority in how we feel in terms of our expressions of love, inclusion, and acceptance of diversity.
Algenita.
Every day that I get up, I look at a calendar that's put out by the Equal Justice Institute. And on that day, it will say what happened, whether it's 300 African Americans mowed down in Tulsa, or whether it's a state legislator in a state that walked up and shot somebody who was trying to vote, or whether it was, and it's at different times. And you would think all of these times were maybe in the 19th century. No, they were, a lot of things happened in recent times. And you think about the sacrifices that people have made to create a forward movement. And every day I'm motivated by that calendar. If you don't have one, you need to get one. It's Equal Justice Center, the center that created the lynching monuments in Montgomery, Alabama. And every day you need to think about, what am I doing that's going to address a situation, whether wherever you are, whatever you're in, or whatever you wish to do. I think about the fact that we are in a very different time. And I hope we're not in the 7 plagues, because I'm counting about 4 already that have happened in the past 12 months with 500,000 people dead. But we are at a point that somebody is trying to get our attention, that something is not going right. And because of what is happening with what I consider the plagues, we are our sphere of thinking, our way of electing, our method for voting, our way for evaluating when somebody is just shot out in the middle of the street in the back, or shot 7 times, or a shot in Bel Air while he's on the ground. Our way of thinking is being impacted, and it's beyond those individuals who are immediately victimized, but it's also getting on. So the attention is somebody's trying to get our attention here. And so I think we need to take advantage of this time. And as the John Lewis says, get into good trouble. Yes, whether it's filing the lawsuit on issues, whether it's being assertive the way folks have been, if it's being assertive, whether it's lying down in the middle of the street, whatever it takes, this is the time to raise those issues. And wherever we are, I think about what we did as Houston Lawyers Association. We had a point where we lost an election and all Black and brown judges lost by 0.15%. Every last one of them in the election. The machines went down, they came back up, and everybody lost. And so we sued the state of Texas and the Attorney General of the state of Texas. We sued them. So my thing is, and we were trying to change the way judges were elected. But whatever we see as a potential for making a positive change, now is the time for each of us to do it. To not sit back when you know that there's a vote coming up and not get in contact with those senators, or you know that we need all $2 trillion of this money. This is the time for us to do it and to organize. And my fear is that because we have seen some rapid changes, that we are going to be a little complacent during this year. And this is our time for organizing. And we really, really need to be organizing and going forward in every aspect of life, whether it is environmental, whether it is in the justice system, whether it's dealing with this crazy education system that we have not, whether it's our health system, and we see how we are impacted. I mean, everybody else loses 1 year of life, and African Americans are losing 3, in this year, in this time. And we're not saying about that. We're not suing somebody for that. We're not clowning somebody because they didn't have sense enough to tell people to wear masks. I mean, this is our time to actually be assertive about the good trouble that we need to get into.
Love it. So Brian, I'm gonna change with you.
Okay.
So to add to what has been shared by Bridgette, Christian, and Algenita, and Algenita, wow. Being able to lead is one thing. Being permitted to do your job effectively is another, particularly when working in environments largely populated with people who are disinclined to support systemic change. What are some ways progressive leaders may deal with opposition to change from within the organizations they are leading?
Wow. Yeah, you have to yeah, that's a full-time task. But what, I can tell you in my experience, when I know I'm going to face that opposition, I go outside of that spectrum and I build up public support for my position. So I go out and I tap people in the community to champion my cause. I build up the support to make it difficult for them to go against what I'm trying to pursue. So, you have to be sophisticated, you have to understand, and you have to watch and see what's going on and learn from what they've done to us for so many years. I've been a student for years, and I've seen what they've done to maintain their power. And so now, I'm educated and I know how to play their game too. So, it's about, you talked about being thoughtful, it's about being mindful.
Yes, mindfulness, thoughtfulness, humanity. I love it. Bridgette, can you expound on that?
Well, I can tell you the office that I'm in, everyone who's here pretty much are people who were here under the previous leadership. But I walk in every day and I tell myself and reaffirm to myself that this is my 4 years that the voters have given me. I set the tone, I set the mood. I'm going to be me, because at the end of the day, that is who I am. And I stick with my core values. If I'm going to roll out something that maybe this office is not used to or never heard of, or just, I called it institutional paranoia with one of my lawyers last week, that we've never done it this way mindset. Well, we're going to start drilling down to the why. Why are we trying to change? What have we done in the past? Why is it not working? And why can we not try something new? And then 2, if the voters have put you here, they want you to do something different. They have asked you by way of the vote. They've hired you by way of their vote to put you in position because you've told them what your plans are. And throughout this process, they get to know you, because our voters are pretty savvy. Most people are coming to the polls with having read up on their candidates. So they want you here to do things differently. So as a leader, yes, you have to deal with the institutional paranoia. You have to deal with the people who are, just resistant to change, just period. But if you drill them down to the why and why this is going to benefit the people, and this is why we're doing this, because the voters, the constituents, the residents, our families, our children need it to be done. If they can't get along with it, then they got to go, because we're here in this position to make positive and impactful change. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm a dictator, because I can deal with differences of opinion. I can deal with, people who may not agree. I say it at this office all the time. I don't need cheerleaders. I don't need yes men. I do need good dialogue and exchange, with ultimately me making the final decision. But we have to always remember, we set the tone, we set the cadence, but what is the why behind everything that we're doing? And usually when you point to the why and you explain to people the why in public service, they usually get along. So that's what I'm rolling out, is what I've been doing years before I got here. And so far so good, but it's only 2 months, but we'll keep it going. So.
Algenita, can you add to this conversation?
Well, I have the benefit of not being elected. So I think I probably look at being a little bit, I need to make sure that, let me put it this way. It's my responsibility as an unelected person to be supportive of those persons who are in position when they are right-minded individuals. But it's also my responsibility to be very vocal and to call folks out when they are not right-minded individuals. it's supposed to change. So when Bridgette is in her position and somebody is looking at her saying, we haven't done it this way, then somebody who is not elected needs to make sure that I am vocal and whatever the program, project, or initiative, that I am out there moving things in the right way to be supportive. So I view, I guess, you know, when you're old and you're not elected, then you can really say crazy stuff and do crazy stuff. And so that's what I really think. I just think us old folks ought to be a lot more assertive than we are. We need to be out there pushing the levers. Our elected people, you all can say things appropriately without profanity. The rest of us need to be clowning. And when there are situations that appear to, you know, folks kind of raising issues with you, how can I say this? There were people who were really concerned about bail reform and had the audacity to have an organization that's going to come out and say, well, we don't want people to be, we got 75% of the people sitting in Harris County and have never seen a trial, okay? And we got an issue of bail reform, and then some folks who are going to come out and be against that. My role was to call them up and say, you know, who are you to do that? And why are you doing it? I mean, I can understand it if you're a bail bondsman, sure. But if you bring your ass in here from some other city and gonna come in here and say what you against, then you better TYL, because that's not your role. So I think that those of us who are not elected need to be a little bit more vocal and visible and do those things that we should do for the issues that we support. And that's my more polite way of saying that.
Well, thank you for your candor. Christian?
That ain't my candor. Now, I can really get candid, but that's my...
Yes, I know. Christian, bring it home for us.
Can you repeat the question for me?
Yeah, so, right, you know, we understand, you know, what, you know, from everything that we've talked about, being able to lead is one thing, being permitted to do your job effectively is another, particularly when working in environments largely populated with people who are disinclined to support systemic change.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just gonna have to echo what District Attorney Middleton said, and actually with another friend and mentor of mine said, which is, what's the point of having the power if you aren't gonna exercise it? I'm a firm believer that folks elected us to be in these positions to make decisions as we best see fit, exercising our discretion. So I don't believe in leaving anything on the table. If I enforce systemic change in hiring practices, personnel requirements or practices, hiring outside counsel, case structure, case strategy, that's just how we're going to do it. I don't think that it's worth putting yourself out there to be a public servant if you're going to leave things on the table and if you're not going to exercise the discretion that you always have. And part of the reason why people elected you is because you are the person you are. So I agree with DA Middleton that you should, you know, go out and advocate and get other folks to buy into your vision. And that is a huge part of it, right? Is being able to maneuver in these spaces. But before you even get there, the first decision, it sounds like DA Middleton has expressed that he also reaches that decision, is this is what I'm gonna do, right? And it's the same thing that County Attorney Lawson said as well. You have to exercise your judgment, make decisions as you best see fit, and then from there, understand the politics of the situation so that you can go out and get it done. But that first step to me is incredibly crucial. It's a threshold question, right? There's so many folks who get into public office and think, or even say in some instances, well, I'll deal with that in my next term. I'll handle that issue in my next term. But truth be told, this may be your only term. So there's no sense and leaving it on the table. And I certainly wouldn't have left the work that I was doing before to come out, put myself out there and serve folks and not make the decisions that I see best fit. So you're in the position, you have the authority, exercise it to get done what you think is in the best interest of the people you serve.
All right, very good. So now, this has been such a dynamic dialogue, and Algenita, I don't know if you can see the chat, but they say you're bringing the smoke. So we appreciate.
Those are my friends. Those are my friends.
Okay, well, you've got great friends and great supporters. And so the chat is open for questions. So if you have questions, please place your questions in the chat. And while we are, waiting to be queued up with some of the questions, and we've had quite a few that were submitted ahead of this discussion, I would like to open up to our panel. Is there anything, during the discussion, I have targeted questions, and then you hear something, you're like, oh, I wish I'd said this, or I want to share this tidbit. Is there anything that you guys want to jump in and add as we're waiting on questions?
Oh, I just have one little thing I wanted to talk about, and that is there was, I can't remember where we were in the discussion, but there was some concern about, you can't legislate morality. And that is really very true. And it's really very hard to undo supremacist mothers and fathers training. But I really think that we have not done all we needed to do to get people to know the other side of the table. And I don't know how to really, maybe I'm not saying this correctly, but I am concerned about the 70 million people that have gone along with this perspective of lies, thousands of lies, daily lies. And the nation is gripped in this what they call the worst situation of supremacy. I mean, this is worse than what it was with the Oklahoma bombing. And somehow or other, we are not communicating to righteousness and decency and justice. That's not being communicated. And I don't know how to do that other than to, I'm confrontational, but how to do that other than just to say to somebody, what makes you think that? What did your mother put in her milk that made you come out like thick you are? Some kind of way we have to figure out how to address this, because I am very, very concerned about the path that our nation is taking and the control that social media has, and the discrediting of logic and the discrediting of truth and the discrediting of honesty that where we are today. I'm very, very concerned about that. And so I guess I would like to hear, how do we best communicate honesty and morality and truth to those folk that have, to me seem to have gone off the rail, and I think are endangering not, our nation, our legislative processes, but also are endangering us.
Anyone on the panel want to share? I see you leaning in, Brian.
Oh, yeah, mine is kind of religious. I think God's gonna handle that. I mean, these people, if they pray about morality, they sing about morality, they think they're moral. So yeah. there's nothing you can say to them to get them to change their mind. It's gonna have to be in their hearts. And so it's going to take life getting a hold of them, and for them to have some spiritual experience that causes them to make that shift. It's so deep embedded in their souls that, it's, and I will say this, we have to be vigilant. We have to speak out. When something needs to be said and you don't say it, then your silence is a lie. you have to be about it. It's like we say in the hood, So, we have to go out and we have to be the change that we want to see, and we have to speak out. We have to set boundaries. We have to relegate these people to their own spheres and let them know, hey, look, you can't be mainstream. Don't bring that over here with me. Leave that at home and keep your evil ideas to yourself. And then isolation in and of itself will deal with them in their own way.
Thanks.
Yeah, and what I'll add is false balance. I think over a number of years with the creation of certain far out media outlets, they've been able to shift the Overton window, right, further and further, to the point where things that everybody used to agree was crazy talk is now seen as a rational opposition to a point that someone is making. And so you have media outlets that now have false balance, and in order for me to say this thing that's true, I now have to say this crazy thing that other people are saying is true that is not true, so that I can appear to be balanced. I think that we really need to push back on that and condemn it when we see it. And I have a ton of friends who see the world differently than how I do. They're affiliated with a different political party. They vote for different people. But I ensure that I hold all of them accountable, and I don't allow them to express nonsense and think that I'm going to treat it as if it's a valid differing opinion. I treat it as the nonsense that it is. And I think that we would get a lot further if we would all continue to call nonsense and lies.
Thanks.
Bridgette.
I agree with Christian just said, nonsense and lies. We have to stop letting people tell us this is my truth and tell them to tell the truth, because there is a difference. And we have listened and allowed political rhetoric to be a truth or my truth and not the truth. And it's sad that so many people have fallen for these tall tales, folklore and fables, and believe it to their core. But again, we have to make that rhetoric so uncomfortable and hold them accountable, bring them back to the facts, and hoping that one day they'll wake up and the scales from their eyes will fall and they'll realize that they've been misled and that they're, following things that are just basically false views of this world. As we said earlier, you can't legislate morality, but we can make it so uncomfortable for those who adhere to these ugly values that they don't belong here, and make them go and flee to the corners that they came from. And hopefully some of them will reconcile their ways to what is right. Just hold up the standards of what is true and what is right. That's what we can do.
Okay. Thank you. And so we have a question here. What value do you see in shedding light on historical and systematic injustice, all the while working towards advancement and restoration in our communities? Anyone on the panel?
The value that I see in shedding a light on historical and systemic injustices is one of motivation. One that's encouraging. When you shed light on how awful things have been and how terrible people have been toward each other, then it motivates me. It motivates me to be enthusiastic about advancement and restoration of the community. Because you want to balance the scales. If it, because it was so bad, and so it's like we got to make sure that we are doing all that we can to make it better, to make it good, and that's my motivation every day when I think about how terrible people have been towards each other.
I just want to expand on that. I mean, for me, when you look at history, what you will see is racism without the mask of political correctness, and you see how deep it is. And so I think just in terms of motivation, you got to see what you're really dealing with and where it came from. And then that will motivate you, because, we will dismiss a lot of things and saying, they were having a bad day or whatever. But this stuff is, you know, it is deeply seated in their hearts, and you have to know the history to understand the present. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that if you don't, you're putting blinders on, and you're really not going to understand the significance of the problem.
Okay, now for the lawyers here, we've got a legal question here. You know, everyone wants to know about ERCOT. Is it possible to charge the board of ERCOT with negligent homicide? This was avoidable.
Well, I can tell you right now, I have a lawyer in my office, and I've actually engaged outside counsel today to look into the issues of immunity that ERCOT has claimed. And currently there is a case pending with the Texas Supreme Court where they are looking at and evaluating the argument of immunity for ERCOT. Now, if I just take off my lawyer hat and just be regular and not legal, I would say this: you cannot operate like a non-governmental agency, structure yourself like a non-governmental agency, but the minute trouble comes, you pick up governmental immunity with as a shield. So I just hope the case law can back that up, but that's my position, is that I don't believe that you should be able to use immunity because you haven't been operating like a traditional governmental agency anyway. So, and I think, and I believe that my office owes Fort Bend County answers in that regard. And we are preparing ourselves to look at this right now, a lawyer in my office and outside counsel, to look at these issues of immunity and look at every angle that we can pursue against ERCOT for the damages that they have caused so many of us, in loss of lives and loss of property. And we're not through with them yet in Fort Bend. And if I know Christian, I believe he's probably on the same path.
Yeah, Christian was tweeting about it over the outage.
Oh, see.
Yeah, they had me tight. So I'm not a criminal practitioner, so I'll leave it to DA Middleton to answer the question about the homicide charges. But the question about whether we can bring a civil case against ERCOT, you know, Bridgette just talked about that. But what I'm calling for is a comprehensive investigation. That the process of bringing power from, whether it be a fuel supply or a wind turbine, whatever it may be, to the final user, involves a lot of different players. You have the PUC, which is the governmental entity that has authority to oversee all this. You have ERCOT, which is the private nonprofit that manages the grid and ensures that supply meets demand. You have power generators, you have fuel suppliers, you have the utility companies like CenterPoint. And all of those folks are involved in this process. And so I think it's going to take a comprehensive investigation to know exactly who was at fault, the extent to which they were at fault. And then from there, my office will consider appropriate legal action. But I know that right now, the PUC has initiated an investigation, which is hilarious because they are the body that's responsible for overseeing ERCOT. The Attorney General's office has initiated an investigation. The legislator will likely call for an independent investigation. So until there is a comprehensive investigation which tells us exactly what happened and who's at fault, I think after that, that's when you decide who to go after.
Yeah, to answer the question, yeah, that civil and criminal immunity are different. There will be no immunity for criminal negligence. There are several criminal investigations going on right now. Jack Brody, Galveston County DA, has launched a grand jury investigation, and our Attorney General, Ken Paxton, has assigned substantial number of people to investigate it, his criminal investigation division. So there's a current criminal investigation going on different levels. In terms of my county, the difficulty is going to be proving the causation between the power outages and the death. If I have those set of facts, yeah, I will pursue it. It's too soon for me to tell whether or not we will be pursuing a criminal investigation against him. But it's within the realm of possibility, and the facts, if they lead us there, we'll go there.
Very well, and very timely having lawyers as part of this conversation to help answer some of these pressing questions that we have after dealing with, so much chaos and disruption in our lives. It's to just put it mildly. And so as we prepare for your closing remarks, I would like for you to couch those in what are some of the pressing issues you would like people to be thinking about or engaged in advocating for or about. So as you're preparing, as you give your closing remarks, 3 minutes, what are some other pressing issues you would like people to be thinking about or engaged in advocacy about?
I'm very interested in environmental justice. It impacts us in so many ways, from the cradle to the grave. And I think that it's a hard area to deal with. I mean, there, of course, there's climate change, but there's also what's happening within our communities. And it's not something that has been profitable enough in terms of the litigation process to really ascertain, place some liability upon folks who have polluted the environment in which our children live. And it's not, there is such an impact on our communities, dollar-wise, property value-wise, just generally. And that's an area that to me is a challenge that we really have not focused on adequately. And I think because it's too hard to get to the financial responsibility part of it. So I would like to see us as a community focus on that, as well as the general issues, of course, of affordable housing, which is my passion, and how we must create affordable housing, subsidize and support affordable housing. It just goes to equity and those things that provide us with the quality of life. There are so many issues that impact our low to moderate income individuals and their quality of life, whether it's environmental justice, affordable housing, those health determinants. There are so many things that I really want to be involved with and to get others to focus upon. And I guess that if anything, I would say that we need to figure out how we pull our existing organizations. And I do want to say that because I've seen our existing organizations come together so well in the voting process, but pull those same organizations together in these different aspects of social determinants that impact the quality of life of our people. And I just want to see more of that happen. And I'm trying to figure out a way, and folks that I talk with on a regular basis, we're trying to figure out a way how best to do that so that we're all becoming a little bit more assertive about improving the quality of life for low to moderate income people, Black and brown people across the board.
Thank you. Brian, are there any other pressing issues you'd like to see people engage with advocating for?
Yeah, I'll start with the political first, which is redistricting. That is the most important issue right now. Mm-hmm. This is going to determine the next 10 years of your life, and it's critical. So pay attention, hold your legislators accountable, watch where the money goes, and just be super vigilant and hold them accountable, especially when next election. and let them know what you will tolerate and what you won't tolerate. From a humanity perspective, it's one of my favorite words tonight, is that I think people should focus on youth. Our best way to change our society is to have better people, in positions of authority and having them in policy-making positions. So I like to say we need to send the elevator back down and bring these youth up, educate them, mentor them, and help them be the change that we want to see in this world. So all these things we fighting against, the best way to fight back against it is the next generation and raising better people. So, in Fort Bend, we're starting the Exposed Excellence Youth Program, E squared, EEYP, but it's a vision that I've had for a long time. And it's based upon that is that if we invest in our children, then we're investing in our future. But that's what we need to focus on is our youth, because we can't change these old people.
Yeah.
I'm trying to tell you, these people are set in their ways, and you can't take that evil out of them. So our hope is our children.
All right, Bridgette.
When you asked that question, a flood of things came to mind. So many things that concern us. We've got, of course, environmental justice. We've got criminal justice reform. We've got, the whole issue of political engagement. But all of those, when you peel it back, if people are apathetic, they're not engaged, then they're not concerned about any of the things that we are concerned about. So one of the things that I want to just work and hope to instill and encourage and motivate young people, especially our young adults and our teens, is that they cannot be apathetic about what's going on. I love music, I love to dance, I love all of that too. But there's a time and place for everything under the sun. And we need to keep creating a wokeness. I don't even know if that's a word, but a wokeness for everyone, because there's so many different angles out there that we should be concerned about. The ability of minorities to get government contracts, in diversity, inclusion in the workplace, education, how our Black and brown children are, disproportionately affected by the school to prison pipeline. But if you're not even putting these things on your radar, you're apathetic, you're just trying to get down and party, then we're losing human capital that we need towards these issues. So we have to inspire and motivate folk to really want to be a part of the movement of change, whatever angle it is. They have to be encouraged and just pretty much just motivated to be engaged. And if it is environmental justice that they're inspired by, that they go after that. If it's criminal justice, they go after that. But whatever it is, sparking the fire. That's what I'm just trying to say. Just sparking the fire in our young people to grab a hold of an issue that's important to you and get at it and stick with it.
Christian?
I really hate to beat a dead horse, but everybody took my answers before me. Completely agree that redistricting on the political side is the most important issue that you're going to see moving forward. Importantly, in the past decade, the Supreme Court of the United States vacated the pre-clearance requirement under the Voting Rights Act, which really gutted the Voting Rights Act. And this is our first redistricting cycle since that happened. So what that means is when these different state governments, local governments draw maps, they don't have to get them cleared with the U.S. Department of Justice. They can just draw them, and then that's the map. And of course, you can file suit, but the standards are different now. So it's going to be much harder to hold folks accountable for gerrymandering and other means of voter suppression and impacting marginalized communities. Environmental justice is incredibly important. It's something that I prioritize in my office. Just a couple of weeks ago, we announced that we opposed a permit for a facility out on the east side of town that's looking to emit hydrogen cyanide, which is a super toxic chemical and we were able to get them to decrease their emissions 80% over a year. It's a pretty significant feat, but it just shows that we are committed on an ongoing basis to fighting for environmental justice. Your zip code should not dictate whether you have clean air or clean water. And lastly, something that we've also been very focused on, everybody across the entire state has been focused on, every single person who's called has been focused on, is Winter Storm Uri and the results that fell out from that. It's so interesting. I was talking with my mother a few days ago, and my mom, for the most part, stays away from politics. In fact, she couldn't even vote for me because she had moved out of Harris County by the time the election came. But one thing she mentioned to me was, you know what, that US Senator who went across the state lines to Mexico, he will never get my vote. And it just angered her because as Senator Cruz was traveling to Mexico, she was without power, having to rely on a generator. So many people across the state were put in peril. You had people die, you had people who have irreversible property damage or damage to their life and limb because of the poor decisions that were made by folks in Austin and folks who are participating in this market. Do not forget the despair, the anger that you felt because this thing could have been mitigated and it was not. And too often in politics, or in public policy, we tend to allow things to happen. We get super frustrated when it happens. And then when that immediate moment is over, we move on to the next thing. You know, gimme, we're not looking at the next thing. But this was the thing that was incredibly important. People died, people had property damage. We should remember it in 2 years when folks are up for re-election. Because if you let folks off the hook for something like this, something that is as big of a necessity as electricity, you're gonna let them off the hook for anything. Gotta hold folks accountable. So stay tuned to see about the investigations and what comes of it and hold folks accountable who are in power.
So how do we get that into the minds of our young people into the forefront? How do we get those things that are important into their minds?
Well, I think social media, ERCOT was pretty much the story of the nation last week. I mean, it wasn't just a Houston thing or a Texas thing. There were plenty of national media outlets who were talking about ERCOT and the important things that were going on in the state of Texas. So, you know, if you want to reach young people, social media and the media is the way to go. I think that after coming out of COVID and everybody sitting around the house for almost a year, having nothing else to focus on except for what's on media and on social media, people are going to pay way more attention to what's on those mediums. So, you know, the way that you continue to have that stuff be a story is you continue to act on it. Lawsuits will be filed. A couple of lawsuits have already been filed against ERCOT and a couple of the utilities. Investigations, when the investigation is going on, continuing to talk about it. Because even in the political space, folks like us who are in public office, who are adjacent to public office, we can't just get silent on it because it's on to the next thing. You know, in my office, we had something very important that we planned to announce last week. There's going to be a press release, whole deal, and we had to put it on hold. And we're still putting it on hold because right now there are more important matters. I think we have to keep it at top of mind, keep talking about it, and the rest of the country will continue to do the same.
Thank you, Christian. And with that, I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to our esteemed panelists, the Honorable Algenita Scott Davis, District Attorney Brian Middleton, and County Attorney Bridgette Smith-Lawson, and County Attorney Christian Menefee for sharing their perspectives and experiences as barrier breakers and fulfilling the dream. Thank you to Shakira Dennis and the entire team at Next Wave Strategies for serving as the host engine. And to our audience, thank you for your participation, selflessness, and for standing strong. Our surmise from this discussion today that we must do more than be optimistic, and that we must do the work to bend our future towards justice, equity, and inclusion. Most importantly, continue to open doors. As I close, I implore you all to remember that there is no democracy with a miseducated and misguided leaders at the helm. We must create the absolute best among us, support their leadership efforts, and hold them accountable. I bid you all good evening.